trajectory that I was hoping for. So I headed down to Wall Street. And I was a stock analyst for 15 years. I started at Smith Barney, and then I went on to Citigroup. Actually, I started at Sullivan Brothers, then Smith Barney, and then Citigroup. And I covered entertainment and leisure stocks. So it was awful companies like Walt Disney, Carnival Corp, Mattel. I was universally despised on Wall Street because I didn't cover paper companies or insurance companies. I covered the fun companies. So every year I had to trek down to Walt Disney World and check out their new attractions and check out the new Carnival ships as they were being christened and follow the new toys that were coming into market for every Christmas season and Barbie's global brand trajectory. All of that was what I had to do. But it was a very tough job. I mean, it was very entrepreneurial. I had to make it very interesting for investors because every year investors would vote for their favorite stock analysts. And there's a magazine called Institutional Investor, and every year they rank the top analysts on Wall Street. And if you don't have a ranking, you don't exist. So you worked super hard to brand yourself, market yourself, write up the most interesting research on these companies, educate the investors about why a particular company had the right strategy or the wrong strategy, and of course, make the right calls on the stocks. Buy, hold, sell, and that was the principle that you followed as a stock analyst. And marketing like mad was a lot of fun. After Wall Street, I moved back into the corporate world, and I moved on to Warner Music Group. I helped take Warner Music Group public and ran their investor relations department and a corporate strategy group. I was there for 6 years during their public life cycle. And it was a very exciting job. I was able to now return to a corporation in a senior role, which was exciting. And also, again, had music and business components and also communications. So this turned out to be a wonderful move. And after 6 years, they offered me outplacement services. And I started taking some art classes at the Art Student League because I did love to paint. It was something I did, as I mentioned, on and off. And these classes were super fun. I didn't have a home studio, and it was a community of artists. And I started to paint, and my kids were at this point approaching their high school years, which is actually when I really wanted to be home for them. And a very astute receptionist at the outplacement firm said to me, "Hey, Jill, why don't you put up some of your artwork on our walls?" And I said, "Okay." So I filled 2 floors with artwork, and that was just the beginning. I got a lot of positive feedback. The paintings started to sell. Friends and family encouraged me, and I continued on this path. And art did become my greatest passion. I started with half a room of a covered porch, eventually got the whole porch. Then I took over the family room, and then 5 years ago, I opened up a professional studio gallery in Mamaroneck, Westchester, in New York, which I'd love to have all of you come visit me one day. But it was using my contacts from Wall Street and my networking and my business skills that differentiated me in the world of art. It was the branding, it was the marketing, it was the networking. I reconnected with a banker who also became an artist later in life. His name is Stephen Manolis, and he introduced me to curators and collectors and art critics. And this opened many doors. And over the past 5 years, I've had 4 solo museum exhibitions, which is kind of amazing since I really have no real professional art background. I'm very much a self-taught artist. But all of this happened by meeting one person and having that person introduce me to another person and putting 1,000% into every project that I did. I wanted to share some images with you from last year's show, which was pretty local. So it was in Hamilton, Ohio, at the Pyramid Hill.
I know Pyramid Hill.
Yeah. So Pyramid Hill Sculpture Park and Museum, 6 months I had an exhibition there last year called Coral Beliefs. And this was, I am an eco artist, so I do love to scuba dive. I have, that's been a great inspiration of mine, and I love the sea. And I put together this artwork, which the pamphlets also show. This is my studio in Mamaroneck, and that's my Instagram handle for people to get in touch with me. So these 25 panels made up coral beliefs, which each panel has a different name, a different belief of mine, and it's actually made in a round, meaning the first panel connects up with the final panel. But here it's shown at Pyramid Hill, and this was a site-specific installation, meaning it was measured to fit this specific wall. And it was meant to be a very immersive experience. It's a mixed media work. It has collage and plastic and paper and all different types of paint. And it was supposed to simulate what it is to be in the ocean and surrounded by coral. Here's another view of it. The center, the purple piece in the center, it's actually called Fury. And Fury is what I would feel if we don't all reach out and think about coral and try to help save our coral around the world. And this was the other gallery at Pyramid Hill, where I showcased some watercolor works, like we have here at the university now. And these are the Contours of the Earth series, which talks about rising sea levels, the drying of the land, and the melting of the ice caps, and another large coral reef installation. This is a short video I wanted to share with you. It's a 3-minute video, which gives you a little bit more about coral beliefs, and we've created it in my studio. Hope you enjoy. So that's coral beliefs in my studio, and here I am with my little furry friend Buzz, 2 months old English sheepdog who's now 60 pounds. And the final shot is underwater with a few of my family members. What was interesting was during this exhibition, I met a woman in University who introduced me to Michele. And Michele, having just published an amazing book about coral and the history of coral. And it was so fantastic to connect with her. And through Michele to meet Steve and learn about the Hefner Museum. I mean, what an amazing opportunity to connect up with people that are so inspiring, and to find a university that was really focused on environmental justice. So I thought that the synergy of all of these pieces coming together was so unique and special. I was delighted to have an opportunity to gift three works of art, 3 watercolors, which are basically the genesis for the creation of coral reliefs. Really came from watercolors and understanding water and how that interacts with paint. So to have this opportunity to come and talk to you about this is really very thrilling. But the key is I want to leave you with a few thoughts. All of these things happen because I believe my business background informed my decisions as an artist. And that can take many different forms. And my view is that anyone that wants to achieve a specific goal, it's all within reach. Right now at the university, everybody has the opportunity to meet colleagues, peers, professors, alumni, and those are the kinds of resources that I have mined as an artist. So going back to the Wharton Alumni Directory and literally writing cold call emails to people from the alumni, I have found to be incredibly effective. I started a group in New York called the Wharton Arts Network with a colleague, and we host different events for alumni who have interest in business and arts. So that gave me license to do that little search in the alumni directory under museum. And out pops all these alum that work in very senior roles at museums around the world. And I was able to put it together within the context of a few days, an event hosting the head of the Aspen Art Museum in New York at a museum that was owned by another alum during Frieze, which is a major art fair in New York, for about 100 people. That was our first show, that first event that we hosted at the Wharton Arts Network. And that event alone allowed all those people to network together to get to know this incredible Flag Art Foundation, which exists in Chelsea in New York, and the people who own that and collect for that museum. And it pays dividends through your life, because it's a matter of staying in touch with these people, doing informational discussions with them. Again, cold call emails, people you think don't want to be bothered, they don't want to respond. And you know what? If they don't, they don't. And the ones that do, you have those conversations, you find out what was their journey, how did they get from A to B to C. I look at resumes of people in fields that I'm very interested in, and I look at their journey. It's literally a roadmap, their resumes. And these informational discussions are another tool that I find incredibly useful. My daughter, who went to Barnard, she would speak to professors in areas that she had not even taken any courses in. And she would go and have informational conversations with these other professors around campus because she was interested in environmental studies. I mean, these are the resources that are all at your fingertips. So my view is, whatever your goal is, you can achieve. My goal, MoMA one day, but yeah, I know I'm a little crazy, but the point is, I'm determined, I'm competitive, and I love this journey. And I'd love to help any students who have any interest. I love mentoring students, young professionals. That's my Instagram handle at Jill Krutick Fine Art. Please DM me, direct message me, and I'd love to have a conversation. Thanks so much.
Okay. I actually have access copies of what I plan to read from my book. Do you mind distributing?
Oh, thank you.
Read along. In case it's useful, you probably not. Thank you so much, Jill. It's been so wonderful getting to know you and to exchange notes on networking and what that's like in the academic world as well, because I feel like my work would not exist without networks of colleagues and readers and librarians and curators and editors and editorial assistants. And so I think that talking about how knowledge really does emerge from those networks is pretty important to do, and we need more of that. I'll be reading a 9-minute excerpt from the first pages of my book, Choral Lives, Literature, Labor, and the Making of America. It was published with Princeton University Press in 2023 in July. And I chose this excerpt because it shows off some of that networking I was talking about, in the sense that it draws on so many different fields and disciplines of knowledge that I had to draw on. Even though it's a literary study, it's a study of imaginative reflections on choral in many genres. It's that study of literature really requires me to use knowledge from and methods from many other fields and disciplines like history and art history, studies of material culture, Black studies, the history of labor and race, geography, economic history, the history of science. And so after I read, I'll be happy to answer questions about that interdisciplinarity, about the business of academic publishing, how to promote a book, collaborating with a visual artist, what that's like, how to write with multiple audiences in mind, both academic and more public, or just anything else people might want to know. And so some brief framing for why I wrote this book. Well, today, coral too often symbolizes our ongoing planetary climate crisis. The loss of coral tends to be measured in biological and economic terms. Reefs support about 25% of all marine species. They protect human lives and property by buffering shorelines, and they bolster the worldwide economy through fishing and tourism. But the meaning of coral to humans transcends any easy calculation. Our relation to reefs is far more complex than biological science or economics alone can fully measure. And that fact becomes immediately apparent when we look at how past generations of people engaged with and imagined coral, as I started to do in the archives of the Library of Congress about 10 years ago. So I'll now read from the book's introduction. In the 21st century, people in many parts of the world see coral only on rare occasions. A visit to the aquarium or natural history museum brings coral reefs or coral specimens close. A snorkeling or scuba excursion briefly reminds us of the shocking vibrancy of the underwater world. An alarming environmentalist documentary or newspaper report confirms that coral is dying as warming seas bleach the world's reef beyond recovery. Yet in 19th century Europe and North America, coral was everywhere. Women and girls, wealthy, working class, and enslaved, wore coral necklaces, pins, rings, earrings, and bracelets, jewelry far more accessible and affordable than gold or gemstones. A demand for these and other coral objects drove the global coral trade, then centered in Italy, where Mediterranean coral fishers brought yearly harvests of raw coral to coral workshops for workers to cut and polish and then prepare for packing aboard ships destined for foreign ports and markets. Reef ecosystems flourished throughout the Mediterranean Sea and in the warm, shallow waters of the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and the Caribbean Sea. All these places were major sources of coral reef specimens retrieved from the seafloor by local divers to supply the curiosity cabinets of naturalists and tourists. Coral served as currency in the transatlantic slave trade. Between the 15th and 18th centuries, Europeans exchanged coral for persons, capitalizing on the value of coral beads within certain cultures of Africa, such as the Kingdom of Benin in what is presently southern Nigeria. Museum visitors peered at display cases of coral extracted from the Pacific by scientific expeditions. People were eager to learn about coral's natural history of defying taxonomic boundaries, separating animal, vegetable, and mineral from the classical period through the Enlightenment. And children in wealthier families cut their first teeth on the coral and bells, a combination teething aid, toy, and talisman that evoked the classical myth of coral's birth from Medusa's blood and was believed to ward off maladies, both physical and spiritual. On the whole, Europeans and North Americans not only saw and touched coral more often than we do today, but they also had good reasons to think more about the nature and growth of living, reef-building corals in particular. As a well-known cause of shipwrecks, reefs raise the question of where and how coral grows, a matter of economic concern to traders, of terror to navigators, and of sovereignty to any empire with oceanic ambitions. These and other reasons drove intense global interest in scientific theories of coral reef formation, such as those famously advanced by Charles Darwin and Charles Lyell during the 1830s and 1840s. And these theories in turn engaged a wide public during a time when the sciences were not yet the specialized domain of experts, but rather, as literary scholar Laura Dassel-Wells explains, part of the buzz and flux of the newspapers, parlors, and periodicals, right alongside often the subject of poems and stories and gossip fillers. Certainly the average person did not have a detailed understanding of coral biology, yet it was common knowledge that tiny polyps discovered during the 18th century somehow produced massive and ever-expanding structures by continually fusing together while collectively making a reef from their bodies over a time span so vast that humans could scarcely fathom it. This process was popularly imagined as labor or work. Description of polyps toiling away, down, down, so deep in the sea, to quote the lyrics of one song especially beloved by generations of US school children, filled countless poems, short stories, novels, periodical essays, and other widely circulating media. For many reasons then, people once encountered coral more frequently and knew and imagined much more about its nature, meanings, histories, and uses than most of us do today. These conditions set the stage for the particular phenomenon that this book explores. In the 19th century, a powerful set of ideas about coral shaped US thinking and writing about politics, broadly defined as a system of managing and distributing finite resources and care. Thus, while this book tells the story of coral as at once a global commodity, a personal ornament, an essential element of the marine ecosystem, and a powerful political metaphor, it also asks us to consider what we of the Anthropocene might learn from the forgotten human lessons once encoded in coral, even as coral itself vanishes. One of the most popular political analogies that coral inspired during the 19th century involved the comparison of human society to a coral reef. The analogy usually suggested the power of collective labor for common good, in a chapter on cooperative labor in capital. For example, Karl Marx borrows this analogy by comparing humans to reef-making polyps. To make the point that collective labor promotes collective thriving, Marx cites a contemporary textbook on political economy that describes mighty coral reefs rising from the work of polyps who, though individually weak, are strong in the aggregate. Marx's point is that coral offers humans a better model of labor in politics than capitalism, for the labors of the coral serve not the mastership of one capitalist, but rather the sustenance of the whole, the work of each individual polyp ultimately enriching all. Variations on that political romance of the coral collective abound in 19th century print culture on both sides of the Atlantic. Yet in an enormous range of 19th century US reflections on coral reefs, that bright romance collides with and founders on a darker vision of life-consuming labor performed by the many for the benefit of the few. In one of the most popular 19th century US poems about coral, for example, reefs exhibit a system of production in which collective labor appears to yield collective thriving, while in reality it requires one group of workers to give their lives and labors in full to a robust and expansive foundation that they can never enter alive. An instant transatlantic success upon its 1826 publication in a Connecticut newspaper, Lydia Huntley Sigourney's The Coral Insect, which was a popular term for the coral polyp, described a race of beings that toil to build the massive reef. They do so collectively, ultimately producing a vast work of lasting wonder and pride. Thus far, just as in capital, reefs are nature's celebrations of communal labor for common good. In this widely reprinted poem, however, and in so many other 19th century US reflections on coral, the details of reef formation disclose another story. Coral insect work is ceaseless and unvarying. The poem opens with repetitive labor, toil on, and closes with its continuance in the rhythmic ye build, ye build. That perpetual toil goes unacknowledged, absent from human sight and memory. It is secret, noteless, and unmarked. Generation after generation, from birth until death without leaving, the workers build a structure that excludes them, for they enter not in, but rather fade into the desolate main, where they die. Meanwhile, the reef rises from their laboring bodies, which endlessly merge to become a coral island that supports those who did not produce it and do not remember who did. Sigourney's poem, unlike Marx's treatise, does not directly compare polyps to persons or reefs to human polities. Instead, the poem explores a key conceptual question raised by coral's natural history. How can countless small and finite beings create and sustain a single, massive, enduring, and growing structure? The poem was published in a historical moment when this question was of the most pressing political and cultural relevance to a polity dedicated to collective thriving, and sustained by the labors of millions who could never fully belong to the structure that they built. It answers the question by imagining extractive labor as a necessary condition of the most robust foundations. And it shows just how easily such labor may exist alongside, become obscured by, and even promote celebrations of communal labor for common good. Sigourney's poem is far from singular in that regard. Rather, it belongs to a vibrant tradition of 19th century US accounts of coral reefs in which the vision of a cooperative coral collective can be sustained as long as one does not look beneath the waves to perceive that a reef can emerge into a robust island by continually and silently extracting the labors and bodies of countless millions of workers. By rehearsing that account of coral in innumerable texts in multiple genres across the long 19th century, Americans repeatedly describe an extractive labor relation that strikingly resembled the chattel slavery that was then sustaining and expanding the US. Moreover, through repetition, that labor relation became familiar and routine. Sigourney's poem vividly registers just one of several branches of US political thinking about coral that emerged in the polities written in visual culture across the long 19th century. During this period, coral's cultural biography, briefly defined as the various histories and uses of coral that generate its social meanings, intersected with political pressures and debates specific to a culture formally dedicated to common good, yet increasingly indebted to slavery's capitalism. The unprecedented entwined expansion of slavery and industrial capitalism between the 1790s and 1860s. Tracking these intersections across US writing and visual culture, accounting for why they recur, and explaining their political significance among different groups of Americans at different moments in the long 19th century is the central work of this book. Thank you.
Thank you, Michele and Jill. So this is obviously a relatively non-traditional way of presenting ideas because we're attempting to create a synergy that shows how all of these different fields really work together. So we want to give folks an opportunity to ask questions that they can be very self-centered questions. How do I get a job? Or anything along those lines, because one of the things that we want to emphasize is that there are practical applications to all of the things that we're learning, the things that we do in the academy like this. So any questions from anybody? Please.
Michele, what was the catalyst for the thoughts that became this book?
Oh, that's such a good question. Okay, answer. I did not know that I would write a book about coral, and then when I knew I would write a book about coral, I did not know I would be writing a book about labor and about slavery. And what ended up happening, I guess the catalyst was that I thought this would just be an essay about a really interesting and weird song about coral that I discovered at the Library of Congress about over 10 years ago. There's this crazy song, I kind of put it up over there. I think it's not this poem, but it was previous. And I just thought, this is the strangest song. What on earth is happening here? Why are these people, whoever wrote this song, which turned out to be an incredibly popular song, which is actually authored by Sarah Joseph Hale, who wrote Mary Had a Little Lamb. So this is like the song was sung by so many people. And I just thought, what is happening here? Why is this little laborer being imagined as the thing that matters the most in this vast structure? And I just started reading, and more stuff came out that was similar to that song, and that why are people rehearsing this idea and this understanding of labor over and over again? And then I just started reading outward from the archive of coral into these other fields, and it started to make a lot more sense to me. And I realized I was really like onto something much bigger than just a song, and even much bigger than just coral itself, but like a way of getting into a kind of cultural imagination and understanding of how this invisible structure all around us actually works and how people want it to work.
Hi, my name is Austin and I'm a first year journalism major here at Miami. And this is a question for Jill. I was just wondering how you can, us as students, like, would you have any advice for, varied interests? Like I have varied interests like in journalism. I'm planning to go into farmer next year for finance. So how can you combine those interests on a non-traditional career path?
Yeah, I mean, there's no simple answer, but, so journalism is your focus. And did you say finance?
Yeah, I'm going into finance next semester, but I'm still keeping a minor in journalism.
Okay. So there are so many interesting job opportunities that combine journalism and finance. And I would probably be looking among the contacts and professors and alumni who are in roles that might sort of be in the periphery of that particular area, which might include like a public relations type firm. I actually had interviewed, when I was at Warner Music, I had gotten a job, but I ended up staying at Warner Music at a firm called Finsbury. And Finsbury is a PR firm that specializes in finance. And they deal with lots of M&A type transactions. And they have very high level writers who write press releases and things along those lines. So that might be one interesting area, just to give you one example. But I would be looking through the alumni directory and seeing if there are people in communications roles that have a business sort of orientation. And it can take a lot of different shapes and sizes, and I'd be happy to have a conversation with you offline about it more, you know, and take a look at your resume and make some suggestions on people that you might be able to reach out to.
Thank you.
I'm hopping on. Hello, my name is Audrey Burge. I am soon returning as a freshman. I really don't know what degree specifically, but I kind of stumbled upon the fact that these interdisciplinary things like the geography building plus the Western program and like all these things that. So like I dropped out of college or dropped out of high school in 2004. And so I will be a non-traditional student. I pay attention to things like the Butler County engineer trying to take a railroad company that runs failure to task. Things like that, like sustainable development might be good, but a lot of my strengths were in actually literature. I read a lot of sci-fi, speculative fiction. But I love nature. My preference would be to be working in like sustainable food in some way. Even if I can't do like the, you know, the most exertion type physical work with that, but like I basically, I'm talking to someone tomorrow to get into the college to careers program with OOD. And so I don't know what major to pursue. They can probably help me. I'm just glad it's this kind of interdisciplinary, taking all the different specialties human beings engage in, and then trying to figure out how to adapt their behavior so we can get people live on this planet, I guess. I guess that's all.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, take literature classes for sure. Come to the English department. Definitely, I think it can be really good to not know what you want to do for a long time. I mean, I think coming into college and not really being sure is actually a good place to be. And I do think though that the best thing you can do, and I wish I had done more of this when I was a student, is realizing that your professors have all these specialties and expertises and all these different ways of navigating the world, and they're not just you know, sitting in their offices staring into their books. They're doing some of that, but they're doing so many other things too. So just taking advantage of every opportunity to sit down and ask those questions, like not just the questions about the course content, which is I think the most important thing, but then also about like, well, why did you decide to do what you did, and what, you know, what do you do, and what does your time look like, and what does your day look like? I don't know. I think that students sometimes, I wish they would ask more questions like that, because I know they have them. Because every time a guest speaker comes and talks about how they got from point A to point B, the students are like, tell us more. And I just think, oh, you should ask your professors too when you're talking. So that just makes sense.
I would definitely reiterate that, because I think that informational conversations are the way that you learn about things that you might be interested in. There are so many different jobs and opportunities out there. There's no way that we all have the knowledge of what, you know, you could potentially do. And you'll only do that through conversation. And also it's a self-exploration process. finding out the things that you love and that are most important to you. Do you want to work in a group environment? Do you want to work in an individual environment? Do you like to do solo projects, group projects? Do you like to travel? You know, these are things that you need to explore and evaluate, and those will help inform the path that you take.
Good evening, thank you. I've enjoyed this so very much, and I have kind of two questions. One is individually, where do you each see your work connected to chorals going? And either collectively or just looking forward, do you envision additional interdisciplinary connections? And if so, with what areas, what fields, what disciplines?
Great question.
Whatever either of us, I'm happy to answer that.
I love your question because I spend a lot of time thinking exactly about that. Having just had this Choral Beliefs exhibition, not only do I want to travel that exhibition to other locations, and I have to research where it would make sense and how I can potentially get a connection to a place that would make sense to showcase work like this. I do want to take the work to the next level because I think it's all about challenging ourselves. And I actually have been thinking about creating it into a community wreath. So it's not only my interpretation of what choral is, it's what everybody else's interpretation of what choral is. And that's what ties us all together. So I really want to come up with, it could be a tech application where it's in an artificial intelligence where people are actually putting in their own definition of what choral means to them or their own interpretation of theory or networking. I have all these different names for the different choral beliefs that or sublime, spiritual, turbulent. So all of these beliefs could be people's own interpretation of those beliefs. So collaborating with someone in technology would definitely make sense for that, step if that happens. But it's something I spend a lot of time thinking about, and I love that question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'll say two main things. First of all, choral actually led me to the life and writing of the work of Rachel Carson, this incredible environmentalist. If people aren't sure, I get all different responses to that. Some people have never heard of Carson. Other people, it's like their favorite writer. I am now working on a book about Rachel Carson's reading practices and habits. So what was she looking at? It turns out a lot of 19th century US literature was important to Rachel Carson. What I'm trying to do in that book is very interdisciplinary in the sense that it's connecting literature to ecological concepts. So looking at some of the bases of some of those concepts that are very much present and resonant and enduring from her work and how she gets to those concepts, not just by reading the literature of science, but reading and engaging with and rereading novels like Moby Dick was her favorite book. Why is that? And how come nobody has asked why literature might also produce ecological knowledge? So she offers this case of doing that. But what I also want to say about that, what seems like a turn away from choral, Carson writes about choral, and that is in some ways how I came upon her writing, was through her reflections on choral. But also, I think what I'm also saying is how long the academic publishing process is. So anyone who has written an academic book, by the time you're giving a talk on the book, you're like reminding what was that book? I said it came out in July 2023, but for people who have written books, what they know is that means that like about a year before July 2023, I kind of handed off the manuscript. And so for me, I'm like years out from having been deeply thinking about this book, which I love continuing to give talks on this book, and choral connects people. Everyone has a story about choral. It brings people together. I will always love this. But I have also, I've taken this other turn into this completely other book, and I just think that it says something interesting about how academic publishing works. It's a process I defend. I think it's an important process, but it is a very, very long, kind of torturous one in some ways as well.
And for the museum, one of the ways that we came together as a choral focused group is we have a diorama that was installed in 1947 that we affectionately call the Cooper diorama, or the Waterhead Turtle diorama that all of you have seen and will see upstairs. And it had deteriorated significantly when I started here. And so everything we do at the Hefner Museum is driven by student projects and opportunities to give students ways to explore these diverse fields. So we opened up that exhibit, we brought students in, we brought sculpture students and non-sculpture students, which was a little bit frightening, and trained them, and woodworking students, and we refurbished that exhibit. And now, and one of the important connections for that, when it was previously installed, it had a handful of coral specimens that were probably picked up at a beach in Florida and sort of put in there. People didn't really understand coral when that exhibit was made because scuba was in its barest infancy. Discovery Channel and the ability to record things like this didn't exist. And so the best people knew about coral, because they had forgotten much of what Michele records in her book, was big chunky rock-like things on the beach. And that's kind of what the diorama looked like, and the animals looked like that too. And so I made connections with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, which confiscates illegally imported corals. And normally what they do, they cannot commercialize these things that they confiscate. And so typically with coral, they would grind it to dust and spread it in the desert near Denver, Colorado. Knowing that these kinds of processes were a way that, frankly, we protect these species, even though this particular action seems a little bit destructive, I called them up and I said, hey, can we get some coral? And along with the coral and lots of other specimens, I drove back in a 28-foot-long U-Haul filled with these objects. And so as you go and look at this science, craft, and art that's exemplified by the grouper exhibit, you'll see a whole bunch of coral that has passed muster with the experts to say that it looks good enough. Although if you are a scientist, you will look at it and be like, well, there are deficiencies maybe in color hue or the way the polyps are rendered or something, which is good. I encourage that. There's only so much you can do with coral. But now this becomes a very coraliferous, if that's a word, diorama.
Very 19th century word. Yeah.
And then this provides the opportunity then to make these kinds of connections and this kind of focus in this interdisciplinary way that the museum tends to prefer. And then as far as the future goes, again, everything we do is created to create student opportunities. So we now have a goal to, when we get the right student, to make this exhibit more than just something that you can glance at and enjoy, but also that will show how a drop of water that comes out of your faucet, your personal faucet, wherever you use it, ends up in the Gulf of Mexico and thus impacts coral. And we want to create an exhibit that is consumable by diverse audiences that helps us understand that in a museologically appropriate way, which is to say that it's brief, that it connects to audiences of all kinds.
I want to thank you for the event and for the wonderful talk, because I've been thinking a lot about the connections that are necessary as we move into this world that is changing, and how science is not enough. I mean, we have to be able to think about it, and make art about it, and make literature about it. And these wonderful connections and the interdisciplinary, although at the same time we live in a world in which the humanities are struggling, interdisciplinarity has trouble finding a home in the economies that we have. And so I was thinking about the thing that connects all this back together is that once upon a time, natural history, for example, was a way of thinking in the early 19th century that saw everything connected to absolutely everything else, and would have seen the connections between philosophy and literature and science and all that stuff. And we lost a lot of that in the disciplines and the way we structured the arts and sciences. Are there lessons from that we can draw, you know, and this happens to be a thing, we have art, literature, and natural history. Can we learn from that to do some kind of radical interdisciplinarity that brings it all, the whole cosmological thing back together again, because that's what it is.
Right. Oh, man. Good luck answering. Yeah, you immediately restructure the university. No,
No, the whole universe.
Now, guys, you can do it as a group project. I will say one thing I love about the 19th century, for all of its many horrendous flaws, is that way of thinking, is that there were, like as I was saying, there weren't those boundaries, so that you could be reading like a magazine that was aimed for an audience of women who were mostly homemakers, and then you'd find an article about Darwin and what he discovered about a coral reef, because people could translate the science in that way. It also has become so incredibly technical and complex that we can't obviously go back to that. So I don't think we should go back to the 19th century. I also think disciplines matter. So those questions about interdisciplinary, what I would say is that I think another lesson is that it's not interdisciplinary if it's not literally paying attention to the boundaries among the disciplines. I think that literary studies has something to offer the world that is crucial and unique and should not be just, you know, lumped in with every other discipline. I think the same thing about history and its methods and knowledge. And so I guess that's what I would say from my perspective, from my teaching, from my research is, I think it's the most important thing is recognizing those boundaries, and it's something, and it sounds like you might already know this, but just for the room, that these different methods that come from these different fields, like respecting and learning about those boundaries, and then the challenge is then to be able to combine those different strands and pieces, and that to me is true interdisciplinarity versus like, let's just have a hodgepodge of everything, right? So I don't know if that reflects on what you're saying, but I guess that would be like one principle I would take away from.
To build on that, the museum often takes a very practical approach because people are constantly asking me, well, what can I do? There was an article that came out recently that 57 companies are responsible for 80% of climate change gases and things like this. And how do I combat that? And so the broad principle that we try to do at the museum is using the anecdotes of the animals. The animals and those stories attract people so much, but we want them to understand those and then apply them to their own lives. And ultimately, one of the overarching principles is recognize your connection to that principle and then reduce your consumption so that you can reduce your impact on the planet. And I will often quiz students, how many people are on the planet today? The answer is 8 billion. How many people were on the planet when I was born? The answer is 4 billion. And my grandma who passed in December, how many people were on the planet when she was born? And the answer is 2 billion. And so your impact, our impact really matters. And so then we measure this in very practical ways. When I'm teaching class and, for example, we make study skins, so we have little Ziploc bags with carcasses in them. Well, if you throw that Ziploc bag away, that's a problem because I want you to cultivate a worldview that says this contaminated Ziploc bag is good for future contaminated work. And so we put it in a contaminated bin and we continue to use it. And maybe simply saying, I'm going to be cheap. I'm going to use as few resources as possible, which is really important in the museum anyway, but is also important in life. And so however you come to this, connecting back to natural history and saying, this thing that I have was grown on the earth and dug out of the earth. Look at all the things on this that were dug out of the earth. We superficially recognize, well, paper's grown. Staples and toner are dug out here. And so how do we reduce that overall consumption? One more question? All right. You wanted the mic.
Oh. So I'm a PhD student in the biology building across the street. And one thing that I noticed when I come to an event that focuses maybe on the more humanities side of science and looking at science or the natural world through like a literary or an artistic lens in both your cases, is that I oftentimes see those from within those buildings here on campus in the arts and in the literary departments. And when I see talks about interdisciplinariness, I oftentimes see those same departments kind of reflected. And I find it to be particularly important to look at science in the natural world through like a human lens and an artistic lens. And it's very much so clear that nature has a space in both of your hearts in some capacity. How would you recommend to someone within the science side of that who sees the value in that? How would you recommend, what kind of take-home message would you recommend for someone who wants that same acceptance towards that interdisciplinariness to the scientific building and bring more of, say, the people who would be working hands-on with corals or, in my case, birds or bugs or anything like that, bringing them to that artistic and humanity style lens to where we all start talking the same language at the same time?
Yeah.
I think that's a great concluding question. It gives us an opportunity to synergize all of these interdisciplinary thoughts.
Sorry.
Oh, I mean, these are critical questions. Do you wanna, okay, so, yeah, I feel like, I think that there's so many different ways to answer your question. I mean, I think events like this are crucial because I do think, at this university, I can't tell you the number of times that I have been working on something and then I'll come across a reference in just the course of my research. And I'm like, oh, where is that person affiliated? They're at Miami. And I'm shocked to see that somebody else, because this place hires extraordinary faculty. And so it means that like, I'll be, just doing research and find somebody and, oh, they're in art history, but they're working on a similar topic and they're an expert in this field. So I think one thing is trying to figure out through whether it's events like this or having classes, like I teach a literature and environment course that draws students in from the Institute for the Environment and Sustainability. They can take that for credit for their co-major by taking my literature class. Designing those kinds of programs because it's just a matter of connecting the pieces. It's like kind of what you're recognizing. It's all here. Like it's all at this university. There's so much happening and it's finding the ways to make those connections, events, whether it's classes, whether it's developing programs, team teaching opportunities. I did team teaching a course last semester with a sociologist, and that was an extraordinary experience for us and for the students too. We learned so much by having those two perspectives. So I wish I had an easy answer, but I think the good thing is you're at a place that has all of that happening. And it's like, how do you find the time, the resources, the energy in all of our crazy, busy, overworked lives to make space for that and make those connections happen? And it's an ongoing question that I ask myself quite a lot. I co-direct the literature program as well. And so we're always asking those kinds of questions too. So I'd love to talk more with you about it at Miami and beyond, if you want to say.
I mean, I think it's all about conversation, and I get back to going and taking it upon yourself to meet with professors throughout the university and doing your own informational tour on how you can take your project and really accelerate your project in a way that would be meaningful to you. I mean, I often think about the business side because that's my background. So I often think about how can you market it, how can you brand it, how can you get the message out to more and more people. I feel like that's the discipline that I always come back to. But I think that there are so many other angles that you could think about when thinking about a large project like that.
And I'll answer that too a little bit. Just today, we set the schedule for how we are going to be revising the museum studies minor so that we can market it to a broader demographic of the university, recognizing that the things that we teach there are fundamentally interdisciplinary. If for no other reason than we can see that part of it is taught at the Art Museum and part of it is taught at Hefner. And that those skills in museum science that are so cross-disciplinary apply to every major. Thank goodness, because there are relatively few jobs available within the very strict confines of museum studies, but those skills that we learn are applied to almost all majors. And perhaps that's the theme that we've heard tonight, and it was emphasized by Dr. Crawford just a couple of months ago that a liberal arts degree results in a person who is going to be an innovator, but often has a very circuitous career path. And you can start off as a pianist and end up here with a lot of interesting things happening along the way. And then the other theme that we've heard this evening is get out and talk to everybody, and especially those interesting specialists, and especially you students, go talk to your professors. They may or may not be sitting with their noses in the books because they may or not have time to do that. Hopefully they do. But they at the very least want to talk to you. In fact, just yesterday, I had a call from 2 former students, one of whom was saying, I'm graduating and I want some advice on how to proceed. And another who called to say, guess what? I just got my 2nd job and it is well within all of my hopes and dreams. And it is totally different than where I thought I would be. And how exciting that Miami can produce such innovative people because of this synergy between all the disciplines. So with that, we will conclude. I encourage everybody to go upstairs and join us for some snacks, to look in the hallway gallery so that you can see Jill's work as well as other work that we do that crosses all these disciplinary boundaries. And hopefully we can engage in some more conversation. Thanks for attending.